type of characters and the type of things that we associate with the English, but the English are not pure a race, because they're not being there. In fact, over history, very few races are pure. There have been attempts, like in Germany, with the Aryan race, there have been attempts here and there to claim purity, but this is very difficult to claim over the course of history that is many, many thousand years of time. If we look at prehistory, the Celts would move from Northern Europe into Britain, and they are the first maybe even there before that, there must have been one. And then we have the Romans who went in and stayed for 400 years. They left whatever they left in terms of culture and influence, and then left. We have to go back to the Roman Empire. And we have the Anglo-Saxons, the Angles and the Saxons, and the Jews. This is the next wave of invaders. After them, after them, the Vikings from Scandinavia of today. The Vikings actually, there is a theory that the Normans would establish the kingdom in France, and who will be the next wave of conquerors in Britain are actually Viking in origin. So we have Vikings, and then we have the Normans. Now the Normans, some people think they are French, but the word Norman is linked to Normandy. Normandy is a part of France today. It's on the west hill of Normandy. It's actually the part of France facing to the east. And in history, sometimes England belonged to Normandy, and sometimes Normandy belonged to Britain. When I talk today, and probably over the rest of this course, I use England and Britain as a synonyms. Sometimes I say England, sometimes I say Britain. At this time, we don't really make a difference. But later on, when we talk about the Irish and the Scottish, then it would be interesting to keep in mind that England is only part of Britain. But the Anglo-Saxons are Germanic tribes which were not part of the Roman Empire, and which developed a civilization alongside the Romans, not as sophisticated as the Roman civilization, but they developed their own system, and when they became numerous and prosperous and strong, they started moving out of Northern Europe. As I said, in some histories, it is them who go into France and conquer Normandy and establish the Norman rule there, which would move them to Britain. And the Anglo-Saxons go into the Britain of today, as we saw the other day on the map, and they establish their kingdoms. Then they will have to put up with Viking invasion, which we will see a bit later. Anglo-Saxon technology changed the shape of English agriculture. Now, agriculture is very important at this stage. Land is the most important thing. Who has land, has power, has whatever you think of in terms of money and being rich and living. The Celts had kept small square fields which were well suited to the light cloud. I talked the other day about the cloud and how technology can influence civilization. Especially when you think of revolutions, agriculture comes first, because when man decided not to wait for things to fall from trees and did not wait for animals to catch animals in the wild, when man decides to practice agriculture, to sow things and tend them, look after them, and then reap whatever the fruit is, and then also real animals for use, domestic use, or for food. Now this is a huge step in human development in general, in Britain. So agriculture in all ways, even to this day, we're talking about if you get dirty, this is very, very important. Even to this day, if you don't have an agriculture that produces of the basic things enough to keep you alive, one day you will have trouble, because as things change in the world and the pace and the speed at which things are changing, you can find yourself in trouble very quickly if you don't grow your own food. And when people are hungry, they don't think. People don't think when they are hungry or when they have too much to eat. But you cannot reason, it's the same English, you cannot reason a hungry man. The Anglo-Saxons introduced a far heavier plough drawn by 6 or 8 oxen, bulls, the males of cows, which ploughed in long straight lines across the field, and was particularly useful for cultivating heavier soils. When the Anglo-Saxons come, they bring in a heavy plough. This heavy plough is drawn by animals, 6 or 8, which means powerful, which means it can go deeper in the ground and it can cultivate soils which it would have been impossible to cultivate before. And obviously, when you cultivate more land, you cultivate better, you produce more, and you become more prosperous. And you can even start exporting. And with exporting and importing, as I said, we don't only take commodities like food and things, we also take out culture and bring in cultures. A lot of culture is actually exchanged in trade. Especially trade the old way, where people move with the things, they talk, they go out in places and they learn things, they eat, they buy things, not necessarily the ones they sell. But today in e-commerce, I don't know how much travels with e-commerce. This heavy plough led to changes in land ownership and organization. The land was divided into 2 or 3 very large fields, which were then divided again into long thin strips. Each family had a number of strips in each of these fields. The Anglo-Saxons introduced the system of dividing land in the community, which was probably fair, because it gives you like a long stretch, which means, and in 3 fields, which means the quality of the land can be different. It's not like somebody takes a square here in good land and somebody is thrown away at the foot of the mountain, with very bad soil. What they do is create very big fields. It's good for the plow, because you don't turn a lot. You take your oxen and your plow, and you take the line maybe a kilometer or 2, then come back again. And then each family depends on the size of the family, and its importance, of course. It has a strip here, a strip there. But it's very important because for a long time, land in Britain, in England in particular, would remain common. I.e., it's like our share in our own country. You know, in Turkey, we have one place which has borders, and they are known. In Arsh, in this country, in Arsh, we have a piece of land within a big space, but you don't have one particular place. And that's why it's very hard to divide Arsh in this country. Because in Arsh, you have a hectare in 10 hectares, but it's not this corner, or that corner, or over there. Sometimes by convention, people agree that I exploit this part, it's nearer to my house. You do the other thing. But in reality, the land belongs to all of you, and no particular spot belongs to one particular person. This will come later, when very rich and powerful people will start claiming land, particular land, and a lot of it for particular reasons. So each family had a number of strips in each of these fields, amounting probably to a family holding of 20 or so acres. An acre is an area of land which is smaller than a hectare. A hectare is 100 meters by 100 meters. It's 10,000 square meters. I think an acre is 7,000. I'm not sure. Check. Few individual families could afford to keep a team of oxen, and these had to be shared on a cooperative basis. Again, we have a heavy plow. It needs to be drawn by 6 or 8 animals. But very few people own 6 or 8 animals. Maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe none. Which means the community has to work together. I have my strips, you have your strips, I have a bull, you have 2, the other has 2. We can put them together and then go, do this, and then the other. And this is how the community works, which is very important. One of these fields would be used for planting spring crops, and another for autumn crops. The third area would be left to rest for a year, and with the other areas after harvest would be used as common land for animal to graze on. This is very important and very sophisticated organization of society. We divide the whole land into 3 big fields. Each family has a bit in each field. In one field, we put the crops that come to fruition in the spring. In another, we put other crops that come to fruition in the autumn. And the third is left to rest because very early people understood that in order to have good land, you have to allow it to rest, to allow grass to grow on it, and to fertilize it. And also, very importantly, that land left uncultivated is used as grazing land for the animals, always in common. Each family has its own strips, but all the work is done in common. This is very sophisticated, social organization, which is very important in terms of organizing societies. It's a huge step forward. Today, you can't get 2 or 3 people to work together. In those days, whole villages worked. This existed in this country if you go back 50 years. This is how things work. This Anglo-Saxon pattern, which became more and more common, was the basis of English agriculture for 1,000 years, until the 18th century. What happened in the 18th century? In the 18th century, there was a period called the enclosures, in which very rich people simply decided enclosure because they put a fence around a great deal of land and using pressure, using force. And they say to the people living there, now this land belongs to me. If you're happy to stay on it and work for me, you're fine. If you're not, you can find somewhere else to go to. And this is how we begin to have the very, very big estates in modern Britain, where you have thousands of hectares belonging to one family. The Saxons settled previously unfarmed areas because of the technology they brought in, especially the hydropower. They increased the area of arable land that you can cultivate. As I said, if you have more land, you have more product, you have more prosperity. In each district was a manor or a large house. This was a simple building where local villagers came to pay taxes, where justice was administrated, and where men met together to join the Anglo-Saxon army for the field, the third, whatever the word is. Again, this is an important step in social organization. You have a center in the community, which is this manor. Manor today is like a small house with a shop. But in those days, it didn't have to be sophisticated like a palace. It's simply a place with a big house and with a place usually covered where people could meet to discuss the business of their community and also to pay tax. And at this stage, the Anglo-Saxons did not keep a professional army. There wasn't an army on foot all the time, like soldiers paid a salary to do war. What you have is, if you have trouble, you raise an army. When trouble is over, you disband the army and everybody goes back to their own business. The lord of the manor had to organize all this and make sure village land was properly shared. Again, there is someone responsible at the top, usually the owner of the manor, who who is in charge of making that everything is done properly. Especially land share. Because what happens is, if your family grows, you can go to the lord of the manor and say, now there are 6 or 8 or 10. I have 3 more boys, usually boys, and they decide to give you more land because this is how things are. It was the beginning of the manorial system which reached its fullest development under the Normans. When the Normans come in 1066. The Normans invade Britain in 1066. When they come, they find this system of social organization, of agricultural organization around the manor, and they develop it in what would become feudalism. The manor would become more important, the land more, or acquire more land, and Normans and others, will depend on this system for the administration of the kingdom. Usually, these lords pay tax to the king. They provide the king with soldiers in his wars. When the king wins land, he rewards these people with more land, and this is how the system works. At first, the lords or aldermen were simply local officials, but by the beginning of the 11th century, they were warlords and were often called by a new Danish name, Earl. People at the beginning were simply not ordinary people, because they have to be a little bit richer to own a manor, and they have to be important in society to be in charge of the community. But slowly, as I said, when the Romans come, these lords of the manor become warlords, i.e., they become as important as the effort they can make in a war. The king has many lords under his control, but there are lords who can provide 5 horses and 5 soldiers, and there are lords who can provide 100 horses. Obviously, this is what makes that some lords were more important than other lords. This is also what makes that some lords will become very powerful and become kings in their own right. When a lord is very rich and doesn't acquire a lot of land and has many men at his service, he can even challenge a weak king to take his place. And this happened many times. In fact, very clever kings made sure that their lords did not become very powerful, and they played them against one another. If you run the risk of making somebody very rich, very important, you don't know when they will start thinking of becoming king themselves. Both words, alderman and earl, remain with us today. These 2 words, earl, is now a rank in the aristocracy, and alderman is the name of somebody responsible for something in civilian life. Aldermen are elected officials in local government, and earls are high-ranking nobles. These are words inherited from the Anglo-Saxon period. It was the beginning of a caste system made up of king, lords, soldiers, and workers. Unfortunately, slowly, English society will begin to be a class society. You have the king at the top, underneath him, powerful lords who own the land, and then you have the army. The army from now on will become very important. It's not yet a formed, standing army, i.e. an army that is there all the time like we have today in one country. It's still an army that should come together for a particular business, and then when the business is over, whichever way, you disband the army. But soldiers have become very important because they win battles. When you win battles, you conquer land. When you conquer land, you can give it to the people who help you, and you can put tax on the people living there, which means the more land you acquire, the richer you become. In order to acquire land, you need soldiers, and thus soldiers become very important. And as I said, lords who can provide the king with 100 or 200 or 300 horses with their soldiers on top of them, with the weapons to go with, these will become very, very, very important for the king. And the king cannot do much with them. And the king has to respect them and has to reward them. indeed, as we will see in the future, some major events in the history of Britain happened because sometimes lords stopped supporting one king for reasons. For example, when the Normans go into England from France, there were people who had land in Normandy and land in Britain. And they were not happy because if the Norman king wins, they lose their land in Normandy. If the British in England win, they lose their belongings in Britain. So they try to stay in the middle. And this divine loyalty affected the history of Britain. But this is something we might see examples of in the future. So it was the beginning of a class system made up of king, lord, soldiers, and workers on the land. One other important class developed during the Saxon period is the class of the men of Burgundy. These came from the Christian Church. Again, this is very important. It's an important aspect of civilization. Because slowly, learning will become important. You know, when people lived as tribes or as small communities, they did not have much need for learning. But when kingdoms or something resembling a kingdom began to exist, then very quickly kings realized that in order to really enforce their power on the land they think they own, they run, they need people to do that. And they need to keep records and to know and to write down things. And they need to keep count of the money spent here and the tax brought from this section. For all this they need learned land. Well, in those days, there was no schooling system. The rich people could pay individual tutors to teach their children to read and write and even to know literature, classics and all that sort of thing. But ordinary people would not do that. The only place where ordinary people could have access to learning is the church. And this is how the church, through these people, will begin to have an influence at some point equal to that of the king, or even more. At some point, kings need either to control the church and make sure that the people in the church are on their side, or acknowledge the church and work with it. In history, at the higher levels, this will develop in a huge war between kings and popes. Because Christianity will become very important, and the church as an establishment, not only in Britain, but in the whole Europe, will in time turn into a federal government with the capital, Washington, D.C., in the Vatican, and with branches everywhere. And at some point, the big question will come, who should the people listen to? Their local kings, like in Britain, in France, in Germany, in Spain, or listen to the Pope? And this will result in a series of confrontations whereby, again, very generally, at some point, some popes were very strong and very politically clever and smart, and they were able to control whether you would have a king here or an emperor there challenging the moral and spiritual authority. Now, religion is very important because it's a way of explaining the world and it's a way of organizing life amongst people. And a kingdom does the same thing. The kingdom does not only seek to explain the world to people, but it certainly seeks to organize life in a given community, big or small. And here, there is a clash between what the church wants and what the kingdom may want for its own reason. Now, Christianity, as I said, will become very important. As I said before, Christianity started in the Middle East, and almost was unimportant for about 200, 300 years. Maybe 200, because it starts in the Middle East, and then it's persecuted by the Christians are chased all over the place. Some of them move into the empire of the dead, the Roman Empire. And after about 200 years, a big community will grow in Rome itself. Again, as I said many times before, with the Romans, if you had a religion which didn't bother the state, if you worshipped your god, Isis, or whatever, and didn't bother the state, they didn't bother the people. But Christianity was, in the eyes of the Roman Empire, a dangerous religion because it seeks to dictate to kings and emperors. It claims moral superiority. It claims spiritual authority for everybody, kings, emperors, and the rest. And obviously, for political power, this is very dangerous. You have another power on top of you as king, which you should protect. And this is why Christianity at the beginning was persecuted. And then, while the Western Empire, the Roman Empire in the West, was declining and falling apart, Emperor Constantine decides to legalize Christianity. In fact, his mother was already Christian, and he himself, history says, historians say, that he became Christian when he was about to die and accepted baptism. It's like Shahada in our own religion. But that's not really important. What is important is that in 313 he legalizes the practice of Christianity, which means Christians no longer fear to be Christians in the open. And this encourages them to go out and even try to convert more and more people, which happens. The other reason is political. Constantine was looking for something to keep the empire together. The Roman Republic was already huge. It stretches from Spain all the way around the Mediterranean to Morocco. The empire is the same. Give or take a few land. Losing some land, gaining more and so on. But basically, the Mediterranean Sea, would be a Roman sea for more than 1,000 years. But in the empire, in the Republic, and later on in the empire, you have a multitude of people, multitude of languages. In urban places, in big cities, some Latin will be spoken for reasons of administration, for reasons of dealing with justice and dealing with the army. centers, there was a bit of Romanization, which means people began to learn Latin and speak it and use it in exchange, and then they began to adopt the Roman style in clothes, in food, in going to the games, going to the baths, living in villas instead of huts and so on. But this is only in big cities. The empire needed something to keep it together. And of course, for people, Christianity could do that. If the whole Roman Empire became Christian, it's like the Islamic world. We live in Algeria, we have Morocco on this side, Tunisia, but there is a link, which is our religion. And in many places, our language as well. So when you have language and religion is common, you can keep control on the different parts of your kingdom. Do you mind throwing away the chewing gum, please? You're going to the bin and let everybody see that you are chewing gum in my class. And believe me, I'm being kind to you. Please do not chew gum. It's impolite. Christianity certainly first reached Britain well before it was accepted by the Roman Emperor Constantine in 330 AD. In the last 100 years of Roman government, Christianity became firmly established across Britain, both in Roman-controlled areas and beyond. However, the Anglo-Saxons belonged to an older Germanic religion, and they drove the Celts into the west and north. In the Celtic areas, Christianity continued to spread, bringing paganism to an end. Now, the Anglo-Saxons, when they went into Britain, they were not part of the empire. They had their own religion, or religions. Obviously, when they conquered what is today England, they did not tolerate the Christianity which the Celts before them had taken as their religion. Because in Britain, we're going to begin to have a local church which is built on the Celts, the original people who conquered, who invaded Britain, and who would be conquered by the Romans, and later on by the Anglo-Saxons. These will be pushed in what is today Wales, as the south-west of Britain. In this area, there would develop a Roman church, which did not have great links with the continent. It's like Christianity made local. The other side is the Roman church. Roman like from Rome, not from the Romans. The Roman church, because later on, the Vatican, the Pope, would be interested in making Britain Christian and sending very important people. One of them is Saint Augustine. This was Augustine to actually bring the British today into Christianity. And this is very important because you will have a church for the people, the local one, and you have a church for the rich, because when the Vatican sends people to convert British people of the day to Christianity, they're actually interested in converting kings and lords, because there is where the power is. If the king becomes Christian, 90% of chances that the people will become Christian. The Roman Church from from the Vatican from Rome was interested in converting very important people, like kings, lords, very important people in charge of society. And this will, in time, create a kind of rift between a church that is very close to the people, that is the work of which is done by pastors, the imam, on a small scale, on a low scale, and a Roman Christianity aimed at the most important. It's one is religious, spiritual, the other is political. The Pope was not really interested in the piety of the king. That's not the objective. The objective is that the king becomes politically Christian and becomes an ally of the Roman Church. But this will be hopefully sometime later. In 596, Pope Gregory the Great sent a monk, Augustine, the famous Augustine, to re-establish Christianity in England. Augustine went to Canterbury. This is why Canterbury is the seat of Christian religion in Britain. You have a big church at Westminster. This time, the big church in London did not exist. It will be built later. At this time, the Christian center in Britain is Canterbury, and it will remain very important. And to this day, the Archbishop of Britain is in Canterbury. The capital of the King of Kent. As I said, Augustine was interested in converting kings, and very important to turn Britain into a Christian land. He did so because the king's wife came from Europe and was already Christian. Augustine became the first Archbishop of Canterbury. This is the highest rank in Britain. Archbishop of Canterbury, after Archbishop Cummins the Pope. In 601, he was very successful. Several ruling families in England accepted Christianity, but Augustine and his group of monks made little progress with the ordinary people. This was partly because Augustine was interested in establishing Christian authority. Not so much Christian religion, but Christian authority. The idea is the Pope says to Augustine, go, convert the kings, that from this day on, they will recognize the authority of the church on them, and therefore my authority. And in the future, we decide in Rome what should happen in Britain, in Spain, in France, and every other place. This was partly because Augustine was interested in establishing Christian authority, and that meant bringing rulers to the new faith. It was the Catholic Church which brought Christianity to the ordinary people in Britain. This is the local church I was talking about. The Catholic bishops went out from their monasteries of Wales, Ireland, and Scotland, walking from village to village, teaching Christianity. There is a Christianity interested in religion, in faith, in piety, that almost like a door-to-door business, like somebody selling, although they were selling faith and other things. And there is on the other side a political religion sold to very important people like kings and lords and so on. The bishops from the Roman Church lived at the courts of kings, which they made centers of church power across England. See, Celtic, the bishops responsible for the Celtic Church lived with the people in small villages. They even traveled. They lived in monasteries in Ethiopia. They lived in rich places, but they went out of them and went on long tours, trying to take the faith to the ordinary people. But the bishops of the Roman Church, the Church from Rome, lived in courts of kings, of Belat. And this is slowly why the church will become part of government. Whenever you have a king, one of the major problems of the king is to have his own people responsible for religion. The two Christian churches, Celtic and Rome, were different in character. One was most interested in the hearts of ordinary people, the other was interested in authority and organization. The competition between the Celtic and the Roman churches was settled in 663 at the Synod church meeting of Whitby, where the king of Northumbria of the kingdoms of the dead decided to support the Roman church. Obviously, a king would support the Roman church. A king is interested in having good relations with the Pope, with the organization in Europe, because if you want to invade somebody, if you want to do something in your society, you need first to ask the Pope, or at least make sure that the Pope would not go against you. The Catholic Church retreated as Rome extended its authority over all Christians, even in Celtic parts of the island. This, unfortunately, this little contention between a church for the people, a Celtic church for the people, and a Roman church, a Roman political church, this contention will end to the advantage of the Roman church, and slowly the whole of England will become Christian in this particular way, in terms of authority and influence. Now, England became Christian very quickly. 20 years later, English teachers returned to the lands from which the Anglo-Saxons had come, bringing Christianity to much of Europe. Now, this is very interesting because the Anglo-Saxons moved into Britain with their own religion. After a century or two, Anglo-Saxons go back to where they came from, taking Christian religion back to Germany. Anglo-Saxon kings helped the church to grow, but the church too increased the power of kings. This is a partnership between power, political power, and religious power. It's a partnership that will continue all the way to this day. As I said, some people may make the mistake of thinking that America is materialistic. We have the greatest technology, we have people who no longer go to church, who no longer do this. But deep down, America, when it comes to very important decisions, when times are hard, when people are under some sort of insecurity, Christianity becomes very important. And many people who come to power have to have the blessing of the religious organization in the United States before actually rising. If the churches, there are many of them, in the United States, see that one rising star in politics might harm Christianity, they will put him down in the very beginning and will not allow him to rise in the first place. It's a bit like the Jewish law. If somebody shows signs that he might not support Israel as confidently as it should be, then those people should not go, should not be allowed to rise and become and take responsibility in the American government and whatsoever level, because this will not, will not be in the interest of God. Bishops gave kings their support, which made it hard for royal power to be questioned. Kings had God's approval. This is very important, because in Shakespeare, in the plays of Shakespeare, there is this idea that kings are appointed by God, and that regicide, regi from regent, side killing, like homicide. Regicide, the killing of a king, is not only a crime against the king, but it's a crime against God. And this relationship between the church and the kings comes from the Spirit. Kings give support to the church. They give it land. One of the reasons Henry VIII breaks the English church from the Roman church, the obvious reason is the divorce. He wants a divorce from the queen whom he had married with permission. I think he does. Now he wants a new permission to divorce her. The Pope says that. But Henry VIII has something else behind this. When Henry became king, and there wasn't much land left to conquer, all the land was in the hands of the Lord. He looks and he sees that the church has a great deal of land, because in this partnership, when kings had approval and support of the church, when they conquered, they rewarded the church with land. And the church slowly becomes like the big lord, the biggest of all, because it has so much land. And of course the church does not work the land by itself. It leases it, like the Lord, to people to work on, and takes part of their product as payment. Some of that remains in the church, and a lot of it goes to the Roman church in Rome, because deep down, the Roman church is like a federal government. It has branches, and the branches pay the central government. They bring money from different places and give it to the Pope. This is one of the reasons of the Reformation. Because at some point, popes could be so rich with the money coming from all this. Because churches own land in every part of the world. And churches lease the land to people to work. And they make a lot of money out of it. They kept some for the running of their own churches, and they sent a lot of it to the Vatican. The Vatican becomes very rich. The Vatican can finance wars, like in the Crusades. But popes, some popes, lived better than the best of the emperors of the day. And this is one of the reasons that pushed people like Martin Luther in Germany and Calvin in France and Switzerland to say, no, this is not the Church of God. This has become like a form of state, with God and religion as their last concern. Those who are more interested in how much money they brought in from places, in the beauty of their churches and the biggest church, the biggest this and so on. And this is one of the reasons that pushed people like Martin Luther and Calvin and many others, because there were people before them who were not successful to try to reform the church. The value of church approval was all the greater because of the uncertainty of the royal succession.